They handed me a letter that read like a poem written by a hall monitor. Please correct the exterior color of your home within 14 days. And I kept it on the kitchen counter like a joke I wasn't supposed to laugh at. Because who writes a polite threat and calls it a notice? That's how the whole thing starts. With a paper, a pen, a person who thinks rules are the same thing as power. My name is Jonah Reed, and I live in a narrow street of tidy lawns and polite nods. Willow Hollow used to be the kind of place where you borrowed sugar and returned it with a smile. Then Margaret Lyle moved into the clubhouse and started treating the neighborhood like a stage she was directing. For years our house was one of those safe, colors grayish, probably the color of beige's sensible cousin, and it kept the mailman from laughing and the neighbors from writing letters. I wasn't looking to start trouble. I remember the way my wife, Mara, squeezed my hand under the table and mouthed the word please, like the meeting was a courtroom and we were on trial for being ourselves. There are two choices when someone comes for your house: you comply, and they win, or you push back, and you risk looking petty. I almost chose option one. I went home. I stared at the paint. I called a painter who used to do municipal work and asked about paint codes and gloss, and whether there was any law that said a window trim had to be cowardly. The painter laughed. No law, Jonah. Just people who like to judge. That laugh felt like a line on a map. There was a way out of this that didn't involve me folding. So I planned something quiet and stupid and perfect. I read the bylaws I had to. There's a strange comfort in reading legal language when your indignation is still warm, and found a loophole like a small gift. The rules required uniformity, yes, but they didn't define uniform in any helpful way. They didn't make human taste the law. It was a crack big enough to fit a paint roller through. I went to the hardware store 3 nights in a row, pretending to be a contractor, sampling a color called Signal, which sounded like it belonged on a fire truck, and then a neon called Cobalt Riot that made the clerk frown because he'd never seen a homeowner buy so much confidence. We painted at dawn. There's something about early light that makes you feel like an accomplice in a gentle revolution. The neighbors who caught us in the act felt the same electricity. Mostly they came out to gawk, coffee mugs in hand. Phones half raised like offerings, but a few helped. Mike with his shaky ladder who swore he could still reach the eaves. Lena from across the street, who brought cinnamon rolls as a peace offering and stayed to tape the trim. We were deliberate and absurd. Tape everything. 2 coats. Make the shutters sing. My hands smelled like solvent and summer, which is a strange scent to remember in winter, but I remember it. Margaret arrived in a flurry that could have been a storm. She stood at the curb with her cardigan like armor, and I swear you could hear the tape on her clipboard rip when she gestured. "What is that?" she said. And the question wasn't about color, it was about territory. I told her the truth, because liars get tangled, and I wasn't in the mood. We painted. "You can't do that," she said, as if the universe itself ran on her permission. I stepped forward and told her that the bylaws don't give her veto over people's hearts. She smiled a small, sharp thing and called the city inspector, like she was dialing a talisman. The inspector came with a polite badge and a pen and a manual of laws that are short on poetry. He walked the property, checked the measurements, compared notes. Some call us irresponsible. Others send casseroles with notes that say, "Good for you." I got a voicemail from a man who used to be in the military and had tears in his voice as he said, "This made me feel proud to live here." That kind of support builds a backbone you didn't know you had. Meanwhile, Margaret petitioned, circulated signatures, tried to make our house the exception that proves her rule. The turning point was an emergency HOA meeting called for the clubhouse, and the clubhouse looks important when you're used to it not matching tablecloths. A gavel on a stand like a sleeping animal. I walked in with the bylaws in my pocket like a talisman, and instead of polite murmurs there were murmurs that had teeth. Margaret paced like a conductor gone mad, reading from a script she'd practiced for nights. Then I stood up and read a different passage, the part about the lack of precise definition for uniformity, the bit that states the board must act reasonably. I didn't say it with legalese. I said it like a man who had found a lever and wanted the room to feel it. Reasonable to me is being allowed to paint my house the color I want. Margaret's face was a study in indignation. She called me reckless, selfish, a public hazard. Someone in the back muttered, "Dictator." A neighbor spoke up about the petty fines the board had levied against pensioners. Another, a woman named Rosa, told a story about her late husband and a mailbox that had been sworn at by the board for the wrong size. The room shifted. People who had been polite because habit demanded it found a voice they'd lost. They voted, not with banners, but with hands and the slow gravity of conscience. The motion to censure the board, not to burn it down, just to demand accountability, passed. Margaret left before the tally, like a queen exiting before hearing the verdict. The end isn't cinematic in the way movies promise, with confetti and orchestras. The end is in the afternoons after, when kids know, not kids, because I promised myself not to anchor anything in children here when people come by and ask for advice about paint or share a recipe or tell a joke about their own little bureaucratic wars. The neon house became a landmark the way scars can be landmarks, something people point at and say, "Remember when?" Tourists? Not that many. A local blog ran a photo, and a cafe named a muffin after our balcony color, which felt weird and warm. But there are aftershocks. Margaret still writes notes. She still gets up and dresses for a fight, because that's how she measures mornings. And some neighbors are quietly furious with us for making waves. They prefer peace to the cost of confrontation. That's fair. When you pull on a thread, sometimes the whole sweater changes. I still get a twinge of guilt when I drive by and see a neighbor avert her eyes because she thinks we're trouble. We lost a few people who couldn't stand the change, and we gained a few who couldn't stand the control. The math isn't tidy, and I wouldn't pretend it is. If there's a moral here, it's small and a little messy. There are rules that keep things livable, and there are rules that people wear as crowns. It's important to learn the difference, to look at the person holding the clipboard and wonder why they need to hold it so tight. Power is a thing that, when held long enough, becomes habit. Confronting it doesn't always mean you're right, and sometimes the cost is higher than you thought. But so often the people who call you selfish are the ones who forgot what it means to live next to someone who's different. So if you ask me, would I do it again? Paint the house, make a spectacle, read the bylaws into a room full of people? I'd say yes, with caveats. I'd say yes because I prefer a messy honesty to a neat lie, because I want a neighborhood where people can be a little loud and a little proud without asking permission from a person who confuses rules with righteousness. I'd say yes because the paint on my house is now a conversation, and conversations are how things change. Tell me what you think. Was it petty, or was it righteous? Did I make a mountain out of a molehill, or did I stand up to someone who was bullying the whole block? Drop your thoughts below. Tell us about the time you pushed back, or when you didn't, or when you watched someone else do it and learned something. Argue with me if you like. I want to hear the reasons. And if you like this, share it, because maybe somewhere a neighbor is nervous about their own trim and needs to know they're not alone.